Welcome to our compilation of epic Cold War stories. Some say our earlier animation is so tiresome that they would rather stand in a Soviet breadline to break the monotony. But we don't agree, so here are our best Cold War stories.
It's March the 10th, 1967. 4 F-4 Phantom IIs from the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, 433rd Tactical Fighter Squadron, are taking off from an airbase in Thailand. The weather's good, and the 4 planes take a heading for Hanoi, North Vietnam. The element leader is Captain Bob Pardo. In the rear seat is his weapons systems officer, Lieutenant Steve Wayne. Their mission is to take out steel mills nearby the city. The Vietnamese are very much prepared. The area surrounding Hanoi has some of the best air defenses in aviation history. Approaching Hanoi, still under clear skies, the F-4s are at 13,000 feet. They can see the path to the target, as it's like a pathway of anti-aircraft fire. Plane number 4 has Captain Earl Amon in the front and Lieutenant Bob Houghton behind. Amon's plane is hit. Fortunately, it's not a critical hit this time, and Amon manages to keep his place in the formation. Going into a steep dive, the F-4s release their bombs. But under the heavy fire, disaster strikes as Amon's plane is hit again by anti-aircraft fire. Then, Pardo's plane is hit too. Both planes are now streaming fuel, and they need to decide what to do next. They turn for Laos, where they can rendezvous with a KC-135 tanker before pushing on to Thailand. With the 2 planes now ascending to 20,000 feet, Amon radios to Pardo. There's bad news. The F-4 is now leaking so much fuel that he's not going to make it. The tanks are almost empty. Pardo checks his fuel. Even though they have lost a lot, Pardo can just make it to Laos for the rendezvous with the tanker. Amon and Pardo talk on the radio, and Amon relays his plan. His best bet is to fly as long as he can, and then he and Houghton will eject over North Vietnam. All the men know it's a dire situation. Ejecting over North Vietnam meant almost certain capture and a long stay in a Vietnamese POW camp, if they were lucky. Radioing back, he told Amon he was going to stay with him as long as he could. Maybe he could come up with an idea. To make it worse, Amon's engines were spluttering and losing power. Pardo didn't have much time to think. A flash of inspiration hit him, and he maneuvered behind Houghton's plane and carefully approached from the rear. Lining up the nose of his F-4 with the rear of the other, he tried to give it a push. He was going to use his high-tech $2.4 million plane to give a boost to the other Phantom. With Amon's spluttering engines running, the turbulence was causing issues. Pardo told Amon to eject his drag chute from the back of the plane. That left open a small hatch, which for a while gave Pardo's F-4 a bit more purchase. The turbulence wasn't helping the plan, so he told Amon to shut down his engines, just in case he needed those final drops of fuel. Despite Pardo's skill as a pilot, the Phantom's nose cone that was ideal for slipping through the air also made it ineffective as a ram to push another plane. Trying again and again and failing, he had another flash of inspiration. Originally, the F-4 was designed as a fighter-bomber for the Navy. As such, it had a rear hook that allowed it to land on aircraft carriers. Getting on the radio once more, Bob Pardo told Earl Amon to lower his tail hook. Lining up again and coming in close, Bob maneuvered to get the tail hook smack in the middle of his windscreen. The strength of the glass in front of his face took the full weight of the injured F-4 and pushed it through the heavens. It worked. That is until turbulence shook the 2 planes, causing the tail hook to slide off. Getting the hook back on the glass started to crack under the pressure, forming a spiderweb immediately in front of Bob's face. If the glass gave way, it would mean certain death. Again and again, Bob kept on like this, with every 15 seconds or so, the tail hook slipping off the windscreen. Incredibly, it slowed the descent of the stricken F-4 to just 1,500 feet per minute. Alarms went off inside Pardo's plane. The left engine was on fire. He immediately shut it down. Needing 2 engines for the push, he went through the startup procedure. The fire started up again. Pardo's left engine was critically damaged. Carrying on with just one engine, keeping the two F-4s in the air, he realized that his fuel had finally been spent. The two planes had traveled 88 miles under the power of one crippled F-4. They had just made it across the border to Laos. Pardo watched as Eamon and Houghton ejected from their bird. Immediately after, Wayne and Pardo followed suit, shooting up into the heavens before descending into the jungle below. Laos was also a war zone at the time, and the natives conducted a search for the downed pilots. Hearing shouting and shooting in the jungle, the four men managed to avoid the locals. After just 45 minutes on the ground, all the men were whisked away by a rescue helicopter. Incredibly, despite his heroic act, there was talk of charges against Pardo for not getting his expensive plane home. But thankfully, reason prevailed, and the charges were dropped. 20 years later, the events of that day were revisited, and finally, Major John R. Pardo and his man in back, First Lieutenant Steve Wayne, received the Silver Star for their actions on that day.
It's August the 18th, 1981. Off the coast of Libya, two MiG-25s from the Libyan Air Force race out to sea. An American carrier group has just entered their national waters and launched dozens of fighter jets into the sky. War, it seems, has dawned upon these waters. The Libyan pilot steels himself, laser focused on the battle ahead, when he sees something out of the corner of his eye. He turns his head in shock. To his left is an American F-14 Tomcat flying alongside him. He stares at the enemy pilot in complete disbelief as he gives him back a mocking wave, and to add further insult, the man on the back seat takes a picture. The Libyan pilot finds himself completely outclassed. He knows the Americans operate in pairs. The second jet must be already behind him with his missiles at the ready. Pilot Lawrence Muczynski and radio intercept officer James Anderson watch amused as the Libyan MiG-25s turn back to base. They joke and laugh, joined by their commander Henry Kleeman and his RIO David Venlet as they return back to the Nimitz. In reality, the American forces have no intention of war or bloodshed, even if they know they're flirting with the possibility. The Libyan government had declared the Gulf of Sidra to be part of their territory, while the United States and many others consider it to be international waters. Because of this disagreement, the US has decided to sail through the disputed territory, challenging the Libyan claim. The first day had gone swimmingly for the Americans, with their fighters turning away 70 Libyan aircraft without a single shot being fired. Kleeman particularly enjoyed interacting with the Libyan pilots, later describing the day as all fun and games. Little did he know that things would become much more serious. Kleeman and Muczynski are back in the sky very early in the morning the following day. Call sign Fast Eagle 102 and 107, respectively. They've been patrolling for over an hour when an unidentified contact headed straight towards them appears on their screens. The experience of the prior day has them quite comfortable, so Kleeman in Fast Eagle 102 calmly reports the contact before heading to meet it. The two planes adopt an intercept formation, with Muczynski in Fast Eagle 107 putting some distance from his flight leader. Kleeman is the first to get visual with the enemy, spotting not one, but two Libyan Su-22 fitters flying wingtip to wingtip straight towards him. At that very moment, Muczynski's radar malfunctions and he loses the ping of the enemy fighters, but he's undeterred. He can intercept with visual only. But then, the maneuver turns from routine to horror when he sees an orange flash from under one of the Su-22's wings and a smoke trail streaking out towards Kleeman. They've just fired a missile. In a state of disbelief, he reports,
"Two fitters have shot at my leader."
Kleeman sees the missile coming and instantly pulls hard to the left. The missile flies right past him, followed moments later by the pair of enemy fighters.
"This is 102. We've been fired on."
Thinking on his feet, he orders 107 to get after the one who shot. Muczynski instantly races into the fray, turning around 180 degrees and ending up right on the six of the two Libyans. The enemy pilots scatter in separate directions, but Machinsky has his eyes locked on the lead fitter. He chases him across the sky, matching the Libyan through every twist and turn. He selects his AIM-9AL Sidewinder missiles and pulls the trigger. But nothing happens. An alert flashes on his screen. The missile is faulty and won't fire. Meanwhile, Kleeman has already turned around and is catching up to the second enemy. He's about to fire when the Libyan fighter makes a turn towards the sunrise. Kleeman realizes in a split second that the heat-seeking Sidewinder could lock onto the heat of the sun, so he patiently waits for the enemy fighter to change direction. It's 10 long seconds until the Libyan pilot finally makes a turn, and his fate is sealed. The missile lights up and rockets off from under 102's wing. He can see the smoke trail as it tracks to perfection and slams straight into the engine of the Su-22, shredding its tail and starting a fire. The burning wreckage falls from the sky, and the pilot ejects. Aboard Machinsky's Tomcat, the radar intercept officer spots Kleeman's target falling in the distance and shouts,
"Someone's been hit! Someone's been shot!"
Machinsky turns his head to see the column of black smoke falling into the sea below. Worry fills him for a second as he can't tell who it is. But to his immediate relief, he hears the voice of Kleeman over the radio, reporting his victory.
"Affirmative. Shot one of them down."
With the Su-22 still ahead and with the gravity of their actions heavy in his mind, Machinsky asks on the radio,
"Want me to shoot my guy down?" "That's affirm. Shoot him. Shoot him down."
Machinsky doesn't need to be told twice. He's chasing the Libyan through a right-hand turn when he pulls the trigger. His second and last Sidewinder rockets away, but goes dead straight, exiting stage left from Machinsky's field of view. Frustrated, but without time to think, he switches to guns and resolves to shoot the fitter out of the sky. But before he can even try, the missile zips past his field of view. It chases down the Libyan jet and detonates into its fuselage. Fire and shrapnel fill the sky ahead, and Machinsky yanks back on the stick. He's squished into his seat as he pulls an enormous 10 Gs, barely avoiding the cloud of debris. Both pilots are recovering from the adrenaline when the news of their peril finally reaches command at the Nimitz. They hear through the radio,
102, 107, you are clear to defend yourself.
Kleeman proudly responds,
"And this is 102, 107, 2 enemy kills."
Fortunately, both Libyan pilots, Captain Balkasem Emsik al-Zintani and First Lieutenant Mokhtar al-Arabi al-Jafari, ejected and survived the encounter. They were picked up by Libyan rescue helicopters an hour after the events. Further escalation was avoided, and the takedown of the two Su-22s remained the only combat in the entirety of the operation, which remained bloodless. Kleeman and Machinsky returned to much fanfare among their peers, but received no awards. The incident would go on to have little political impact. It further strained the already terrible US-Libyan relations, but brought about little action from either government. The events of that day would be studied by the writers of Top Gun, who used it and other engagements as inspiration for the movie's combat scenes. Fast Eagle 102 went on to be restored by a group of veterans in 2016. It's now on display in the Midland Army Airfield Museum, where you can visit it in Texas. In 1951, in the skies over North Korea, a clash of political ideologies has turned into a clash of cutting-edge weapons, a battle of MiG-15s versus F-86 Sabres. In particular, in the skies over the communist-held territory lay the main aerial battleground. Here, the two sides battled not only for air superiority, but also for the chance to pit communist forces against the American and UN forces. This famed battleground would become known by another name, a name of one of the main weapons in the duels of life and death that regularly played out here. This place would become known as
MiG Ali. Pilots from the Soviet Union had secretly been performing active roles since the middle of 1951. They had to wear Chinese uniforms while flying and were banned from speaking Russian on the radio. Instead, they had phonetically spelled out Korean words on their kneeboards. The use of these did not last long though. When they found themselves in combat, the Soviet Union pilots quickly switched to Russian. The Americans quickly came to realize that some pilots in the Chinese and Korean air forces were at a much greater skill level. They started to call these legendary MiG pilots honchos. The head honcho they gave a special name to. He was Casey Jones. Flying a MiG-15 bis, this exceptionally talented pilot had a striking plane with a red nose and fuselage stripes. In actual fact, the pilot was Sergei Kramarenko, a veteran pilot from World War II. On June the 17th, 1951, Kramarenko noticed that 3 Sabres were flying below him. He said, "Without not even losing a second, I jumped them. But somehow they spotted me and immediately they split. The wingmen performed a diving turn to the left and the leader a climbing right turn. This tactic was a trap. For whichever one I attacked, I would be forced to turn my tail to the others and then they would get me under fire. I had to decide fast. Who shall I attack? Should I attack the pair which was diving or the Sabre which was climbing? If I jumped the first ones, the latter would dive after me and he would shoot me down. That's why I chose the latter. So I dived and soon I put myself behind him. I aimed and at a distance of about 500 meters, I opened up." In one of the Sabres, Lieutenant Colonel Hinton had spotted the Sabre of Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Eagleston, a World War II ace, and he wasn't alone. On Eagleston's tail was the legendary Casey Jones, and he was pounding the Sabre with cannon fire. "I could see the MiG fire and see its shells hitting the Sabre," he said, with flame and sparks marking the strikes on the fuselage. Smoke started to pour from Eagleston's Sabre, and it looked bad. Quickly, 2 American Sabres managed to get behind old Casey. Realizing that he had 2 Sabres on his tail, he suddenly broke off his attack and dove towards the Yalu River. Taking advantage of the MiG's speed, he easily pulled away from the Sabres. Ground fire from the Korean dam shook the lagging Sabres off his tail. Incredibly, escorted by Hinton, Eagleston managed to get his shot-up Sabre down safely, although it had to be scrapped shortly afterwards. A few months later, Kramarenko was flying on a defensive operation over Anju when he and other flyers in his regiment were jumped by 2 groups of F-86 Sabres. He later said, "We repulsed the first attack of the Sabres and maneuvered to an altitude of about 9,000 meters. At this point, another group of Sabres came up and attacked the regimental commander's group from above. Although I was almost without speed, I had to increase the climbing angle and open fire at the leader of the Sabres from a distance of 600 meters. His plane passed through my track, and I saw several shells explode on it. After my rounds hit, the leading Sabre increased its dive angle and went down. But when I turned around, I saw that my group was also being attacked from above. It was a new group of Sabres. I gave the command, 'U-turn, everyone!' I felt a sharp impact and my MiG suddenly started spinning rapidly. I was pinned against the port side and the rudders were inoperative. It felt as if a wing had come off. I decided to leave the unguided plane which was spinning and falling down vertically, pressed against my port side. I reached the ejection handle with great difficulty and pressed it. My eyes darkened from the sharp impact and I did not feel at all how I flew out of the plane." In total, in and around MiG Alley, 224 Sabres were lost, 566 MiG-15s. Although against Soviet pilots the kill rate is estimated to be 1.4 MiGs lost for every 1 Sabre. Kramarenko was rescued. Receiving the Hero of the Soviet Union for his action in Korea, he lived a long life and died in just May 2020.
May the 1st, 1960. In the USSR, it's the day of the International Solidarity of Workers, a day of military parades and a demonstration to the peoples of the Soviet Union of the unshakable success of communism. There's no time for celebration, though, at a radar station in Soviet Kazakhstan as alarms blare. They know exactly what it is. It's a spy plane. This blip on the radar has been a thorn on the side of the USSR for half a decade.
Flying at an absurd 70,000 feet, there's been little the Soviets have been able to do about it, much to their frustration. They know the name of their nemesis as it's spoken of in hushed tones in top secret meetings. The U-2. Head on over to yarnhubstore.com to shop our latest designs and be the envy of all your friends. The Soviet missiles and interceptors always fall short. That is, until today. High Command scrambles absolutely everything to intercept the American plane as it blazes its way deep into the Soviet heartland, further than any U-2 has ever gone before. The Major General in charge, Solodovnikov, receives the news of the contact, and much to his anger, the higher-ups have been furious about the overflights for a long time and demand immediate results. Under immense pressure, he's determined to take the plane down, no matter the cost. He immediately orders all surface-to-air missile installations in the flight path onto high alert and every air unit commander to intercept. At a training ground near Sverdlovsk, Major Mikhail Voronov adjusts his parade uniform in preparation to meet with officers from other nearby divisions. As it's a holiday, many are taking the chance to relax. Suddenly, he receives an urgent call from the headquarters. There's an American spy plane incoming, and he's to go to his post immediately. Caught completely by surprise, Voronov runs to gather whichever soldiers from his unit haven't yet gone on leave. Meanwhile, inside the spy plane, pilot Francis Gary Powers of the CIA calmly and methodically follows his flight plan. Unaware of the events going on below, he keeps the plane steady as he overflies Chelyabinsk 65, a secret plutonium production facility. 30,000 feet below him is a MiG-19. The pilot struggles to see the U-2 from here and is completely unable to shoot it down due to the height difference, but he shadows it and reports its position. Somewhere else in the vicinity is an Su-9, fresh out of the factory. The pilot is delivering the plane to its airbase with no armament or pressure suit when he receives a frantic transmission from the Major General himself, ordering him to find and ram the American out of the sky. The pilot, Mentyukov, is shocked. He questions the order, but the Major General shuts him down. Ram the intruder. That's an order, he hears through the radio. Faced between two impossible choices, the pilot solemnly and bravely replies, "Take care of my family, will you?" and gives chase. Back on the SAM site, the Major and his soldiers rush to get the S-75 Dvina surface-to-air missile battery system online before the intruder passes over. In the air, the Su-9 pilot is having a hard time. He's getting transmissions all the while in his ear shouting at him the location of the intruder and what to do to get there. But no matter what he does in the Su-9, he can't see the American. He has to use a lot of afterburner to maintain such an extreme altitude, but without a visual, all he's doing is wasting precious fuel. At the SAM site, a ping appears on the radar, then a second ping at a lower altitude. The radar operator selects a higher ping and the system quickly locks onto it. "Fire 3, the Major orders. The operator presses the button and the missile rockets off from its platform. It snakes left and right in the air as it gains altitude before it finally straightens out and heads for its target. It's the first time he's fired the missile, and the operator watches it with concern and forgets to fire the other two. "Fire! Fire!" Major Voronov orders, but it's too late and the lock has been lost. Command warns Mentyukov of incoming missiles, and he immediately breaks the chase, making for safety. On the ground, the Major can see the U-2 and his missile on the radar screen. The blips inch closer together with each radar refresh, just closer and closer. The missile detonates behind the plane. Inside the U-2, Powers notices that the sky is suddenly lit orange, and then he feels a jolt forward. The plane starts to careen to the side, and Powers adjusts the controls. But then the plane pitches nose down, and then nose up. The tail is blown off, and there's nothing he can do. The U-2 then starts to roll, and the wings separate from the fuselage. The U-2 starts to fall like a rock from 70,000 feet in the sky. Powers gathers himself from the shock. His dashboard is lit with warnings, and the altimeter is rapidly falling. Acting fast, he frees himself from the harness and opens the canopy. He doesn't have time to destroy the top-secret camera as the cockpit violently decompresses in an instant, ripping off the canopy and sucking Powers alongside it. Everything becomes a blur as he's hit by the barrage of air. He's stuck halfway out of the plane, held on by the oxygen tube. The wind shoves him against the falling fuselage as he falls through the clouds, fighting desperately for his life. He fights with the tube, each passing second seeming like an eternity. Finally, he rips it off and the wind flings him away from the aircraft. The plane drifts away and he pulls his chute. While descending under the parachute, Powers scatters his escape map and disassembles a silver dollar suspended around his neck containing a poison-laced injection pin. He secretes a poison pin in his uniform, but doesn't use it. He was still hopeful of escape. Back on the SAM site, the men see 2 radar pings touch, then a cloud of pings, then nothing. The soldiers cheer. That's a hit. Major Voronov gleefully reports back to base. Target destroyed, but headquarters shut him right down. No, he's dropped decoys. Seek the intruder, comes the reply. The major's taken aback, but there's nothing his crew can do now anyway. 2 MiGs are sent to find the American pilot, while the Major General orders the anti-air commanders to keep firing. Some commanders ask if they should be careful in case there are friendly forces in the area. They're told in no uncertain terms, there aren't any friendly forces in the area. Meanwhile, in the MiG-19s, Sergei Safronov and his wingman, Boris Aviazan, enter the area as instructed, searching for what they believe is a still-flying U-2. What they don't know is that due to the holiday, technicians haven't switched their friend or foe transponders to the new codes for May. The MiGs appear on the surface-to-air missile radars, and they're fired upon. Warning alarms screech inside the MiGs as they instantly break off into evasive maneuvers. 2 missiles streak past one MiG before he manages to flee. But Safronov isn't so lucky. He's hit, and his plane all but disintegrates around him. He ejects. At that time, Powers falls hard on the floor. He's met by farmers from a local village. They help him, believing him to be Soviet at first. But the obvious is quickly realized. One of the farmers writes, USA, on a windshield of a dusty truck. And Powers, begrudgingly, nods. By the time the dust settles, over a dozen missiles have been launched on that day, over a course of half an hour. Long after Powers is already on the ground, the US government, when informed of Powers' disappearance over the Soviet Union, had to make a decision. What was the official line? They didn't know if Powers was alive or dead. They chose to issue a false statement that said a US weather plane had strayed off course after its pilot had difficulties with his oxygen equipment. What the CIA did not realize was that the plane had crashed almost fully intact and that the Soviets had recovered its pilot and the plane's top-secret, high-altitude camera. Taken to Moscow, Powers was interrogated by the KGB for months, but eventually made a confession and a public apology for his part in the espionage. Despite the interrogation, Powers still managed to keep some secrets, including the maximum ceiling of the U-2. Despite resisting interrogation for months, after his apology to the Soviets, the American media frequently portrayed Powers as a coward and even as a symptom of the decay of America's moral character. The major of the SAM site, Mikhail Voronov, and his men would be distinguished for their actions in shooting down the U-2 on that day. The MiG pilot who ejected, Sergei Safronov, would sadly pass away from his injuries. Major General Solodovnikov was expelled from the military for his handling of the situation on that fateful day. Mentikov, the Su-9 pilot, would get to take care of his family himself. His wife gave birth just 4 months later. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the U-2 incident rocked the American government. It deteriorated Soviet-American relations and triggered political mayhem in the United States, as all attempts to cover up and make excuses for the incident backfired. Powers was released a year and a half after the accident in a prisoner exchange, which was later portrayed in the Tom Hanks film Bridge of Spies. He would be awarded the CIA's Intelligence Star upon his return to the United States and personally congratulated by sitting senators for his actions. In 1977, Powers was piloting a helicopter for KNBC Channel 4 over San Fernando. Due to a faulty gauge, he ran out of fuel. While trying to conduct an emergency landing, he noticed children playing in the area and directed the helicopter elsewhere to avoid crashing into them. Powers died in the crash. It's been speculated that he may have survived were it not for this selfless final act.
It's September the 10th, 1952, and a pair of F-4U-4B Corsairs make their way across the clear North Korean skies. On board the lead plane is Captain Jesse Fulmar of the Marine Fighter Attack Squadron number 312, also known as the Checkerboards. Him and his wingman, First Lieutenant Willie Daniels, are on a bombing mission with the old World War II fighters, their usual role since the dawn of the jet age. Fulmar scans the shores as the pair fly straight into the mouth of the Taedong River. He's carrying over 2,000 pounds of bombs and rockets, and he's looking for targets. Without a target, Fulmar orders to patrol the estuary just in case the enemy show themselves. Little does he know, up high and in the distance there are two MiG-15s that have noticed the pair of blue aircraft. Fulmar and Daniels fly back towards the sea, taking a look at the riverbanks and the coastal city of Chinampo. They reach the coast and turn back around for another observation run through the estuary. But as he turns, Captain Fulmar spots the glimmering form of two enemy MiG-15 preparing to dive upon them. Bandits! The Corsairs immediately release all of their payload upon the uttering of the word. The thousands of pounds of bombs and external fuel tanks fall away to the sea, and the pilots feel the aircraft come alive. Fulmar slams the throttle to full and tightens his turn towards the MiGs, racing to pass underneath them. Up above, the MiGs dive straight down towards them, barreling for their prey with the blazing speed of modern fighter jets. But the Corsair is closing in too much, and the dive angle is becoming far too steep. Fulmar watches as the MiGs level out of their dive and roar past overhead. He catches his breath. His maneuver had worked, but it's only gained him some time. He orders Daniels into a defensive weave as he looks back over his shoulder, desperately searching for the enemy jets. But instead, he sees something much worse. There's two more MiG-15s approaching, in from his left. His heart races. The already stacked deck suddenly is becoming all but unwinnable. The two proud Marines aren't going to back down easily, though. He can only hope the old fighter-bomber underneath him can stay the course. Full of determination, he turns his Corsair hard towards the two incoming enemies, hoping to meet their assault head-on. But they're closing in too fast. Mid-turn, the pair of MiGs unleash their cannons upon the Corsairs, their 23mm shells streaking past right in front of Fulmar's windshield, but miraculously, they miss. Realizing that his opponents are about to overshoot, Fulmar turns his aircraft back towards the right as the MiGs race past at blistering speed. The enemy gives him their backs, and he quickly brings his sights onto the closest MiG. Fulmar pulls the trigger and unleashes a barrage from his quad 20mm cannons. The shells fly across the Korean sky, guided by Fulmar's impeccable aim. They explode into the rear of the jet and tear right through its fuselage. Fulmar can see the flashes of the impact. It's a hit, and the MiG starts to pour a grey trail of fuel. It banks away from Fulmar's sights and speeds off for a couple of seconds before the grey trail turns a deep black. The Marine watches as the pilot loses control of the burning machine and ejects over the North Korean fields. Now pumping with adrenaline, the pair resume their defensive weave with three MiGs still circling around them, but they don't make any move. Fulmar wonders why, until he spots 4 more jets in the distance coming to join the fray. Dread grips him. If the situation was near unwinnable before, now it's absolutely impossible. In a last-ditch attempt, he orders to dive and flee for the sea. The two corsairs race away as fast as they can. The Yellow Sea is so frustratingly close, but the bandits are coming in fast. The two aviators can feel it. They aren't going to make it. The lead MiG is coming right in on their tail with its sight square on Fulmar. Daniels sees it coming and slows his corsair to let the enemy overshoot. The MiG flies past him, and Daniels tries to bring his sights onto its fuselage. But the bandit knows the Marine's intentions and pulls away from the attack run, barely escaping his crosshairs. With Daniels focused on the first MiG, the second bandit in line finds itself with a clear line of sight to Fulmar's straight-flying corsair, and it pulls the trigger. Fulmar sees the traces of 23mm fire streaking past his canopy, but has no time to react before an explosion rocks his airframe. The aircraft shakes violently and pulls hard to the left. He fights it hard as his assailant flies past. Fulmar wants to shoot back, but the corsair is critically wounded, still pulling left, despite holding the stick full right. He turns his eyes towards his wing, and he sees the entire left aileron is missing. A section of wing near the root is completely torn open, and 4 feet has been shaven off the wingtip. He can tell he won't land this bird. Thinking quickly, he takes his radio and broadcasts a distress signal along with his position as a third MiG opens fire and its tracers fly past. Finishing the transmission, he hurriedly opens his canopy and jumps out of the stricken aircraft. The wind crashes into him like a wall, sending him tumbling through the air. Fulmar gathers his senses and opens his chute just as the ear-piercing roar of a jet engine sounds right past him. MiGs swarming his pilotless corsair. Meanwhile, Daniels seizes the distraction of his flight leader's troubled plane and bolts out to sea, diving for speed and escaping as fast as he can. His chasers have instructions not to venture towards the waters or separate from their comrades, so with many focusing on the crippled corsair, the planes chasing Daniels let him go, and he manages to escape. Fulmar watches his plane get torn apart by MiG fire and fall like a rock into the ground, slamming into the sea in a monumental splash. The bandits disperse almost immediately afterwards. By the time Fulmar falls into the rolling waves below, the shore has already largely fallen back to its natural silence. Thankfully, the rescue wouldn't take long. Allied forces heard his transmission and an Albatross seaplane was dispatched to his location. He would be picked up from the water not 10 minutes later, without a scratch. Jesse Fulmar would be awarded the Silver Star for his actions that day, and would earn the distinction of being the first Marine Corps pilot to shoot down a MiG-15. He would survive the war and return home with his Silver Star and a Purple Heart. He passed away in 2004, aged 83. Please like and comment on the video, and also subscribe and help us get to 1 million subscribers. Thank you. It's the afternoon of January the 2nd, 1967, and in the skies over North Vietnam, American F-4 Phantom IIs from the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing in Ubon, Thailand, roar towards a Vietnamese airbase in what will become one of the conflict's most epic air engagements. Sporting an old-fashioned handlebar mustache and leading the 28-jet charge is 44-year-old ace Colonel Robin Olds. Following the same route at identical speed and altitude as the lumbering F-105 Thunder Chiefs that regularly bomb the north, they're on a deceptive fishing expedition. Olds' cockpit view of the enemy airstrip below is obscured by clouds, and he's unsure if the Vietnam People's Air Force will take the bait. Still reeling from multiple losses to MiGs in the previous weeks, morale is at a low, but Operation Bolo is about to change that. It's cunningly simple. By mimicking F-105s, the Phantom's ruse should trick the Vietnamese Air Force brass into sending their coveted warbirds into a dogfight, but this time on the Americans' terms. On the ground, North Vietnamese radar operators are tracking what they think are Thunder Chiefs with high-tech Soviet hardware.
With the skies clearing, ground controllers scrabble more than a dozen Russian-built MiG-21s to intercept the decoys in what they think is going to be yet another turkey shoot. Lining up on the tarmac, the pilots shove their throttles forward and hurtle into the air towards the foreign invaders. Emerging from the clouds, just as Olds and his team arrive over the target, the first MiG is followed by a second, and then a third. But instead of Thunder Chiefs, the sky is crawling with deadly Phantom IIs, armed for aerial combat. Commander Colonel Daniel Chappie James, in a flight behind, radios a warning to Olds. Olds later said, "The battle started when the MiGs began to get out of the cloud cover. Unfortunately for me, the first one appeared in my 6 o'clock. I think it was more an accident than a planned tactic. As a matter of fact, in the next few minutes, many other MiGs started to exit from the clouds from different positions. I was lucky. The flight behind me saw the MiGs and tried to divert its attention. I broke to the left, sharply enough to get away of his line of fire, hoping that my wingman would take care of him. Meanwhile, another MiG came out of the clouds, turning widely about my 11 o'clock, at a distance of 2,000 yards. He went into the clouds again, and I tried to follow. A third enemy plane appeared in my 10 o'clock from the right to the left. In simple words, almost in the opposite direction. The first MiG zoomed away and I engaged the afterburner to get in an attack position against this new enemy. I reared up my aircraft in a 45-degree angle inside his turn. He was turning to the left, so I pulled the stick and barrel rolled to the right. Thanks to this maneuver, I found myself above him, half upside down. I held it until the MiG finished his turn, calculating the time so that if I could keep on turning behind him, I would get on his tail. With a deflection angle of 20 degrees at a distance of 1,500 yards. That was exactly what happened. He never saw me. Behind and lower than him, I could clearly see his silhouette against the sun when I launched 2 sidewinders. One of them impacted and tore apart his right wing. Meanwhile, Captain Walter S. Radiker III spots a circling MiG and takes action. Straining to see through the sight but unable to get a missile lock, he fires anyway. Now, in flight and streaking towards its elusive target, the Sidewinder locks on to the superheated engine exhaust and plows into the MiG's tail, sending it into an unrecoverable spin. At this point, 3 MiG-21s are down without a single Phantom lost. In the flight behind Olds, Colonel James was also seeing some action. At 15:04, his flight was attacked by 3 MiGs, 2 from the 10 o'clock and 1 from the 6 o'clock. Concentrating on the approaching MiGs head-on, he didn't see the one behind. Suddenly, the weapons systems officer behind him warned that they had a bandit on their 6. James suddenly turned left, then right, and caught sight of the 3rd MiG. In his own words, I ordered to my numbers 3 and 4 to brake right. As they did so, the MiG broke left for some mysterious reason, and for a split second, we were side by side. We were so close that besides the red stars in his wings, I could clearly see the pilot's face. I began a horizontal barrel roll to get away from him and into an attack position. Once in position, I launched a Sidewinder. The missile missed because the evading MiG broke left at full throttle. James orders Raspberry to take the shot and slides in behind him, but the agile single-engine fighter is outturning the F-4 until Raspberry's had enough and performs another barrel roll that places him in a perfect position for mere fractions of a second, which he takes advantage of by firing an A9 that slams into the MiG's tail. According to Air Force records, without a loss, the Phantom score 7 confirmed MiG-21 kills, although officially, Vietnam claims it's 5. Later back at Ubon, jubilant ground crews line the taxiways. As each Phantom passes, the pilots open their canopies and hold up their fingers, indicating how many kills they scored. It's June the 10th, 1988. Shrouded in darkness, 2 massive 4-engine C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Group, otherwise known as the Night Stalkers, roar towards an airfield in southern Chad. Inside their cavernous fuselages, 2 stripped-down MH-47 Chinook transport helicopters and more than 70 Special Forces soldiers from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, are ready for action. The commandos are well-trained and heavily armed, but few know their true identity, though it's rumored they're Delta Force. Moments later, as the planes descend towards the airstrip, the fragile quiet is shattered by screeching tires slamming into the hot tarmac. Then, with a deafening rush, the C-5's powerful thrust reversers send clouds of sand rolling into the desert air as the planes lurch to a stop. Taxiing to nearby staging areas, the crews unload the MH-47s, top off their tanks, and prepare them for the next leg of the journey. Checking their gear and climbing into the Chinooks as the sun peeks over the horizon, the twin turbines spool up, and the hefty three-bladed rotors chop through the dry air, lifting the huge birds skywards. At full throttle they climb and head towards the abandoned Libyan airbase at Ouadi Doum in northeast Chad. If everything goes as planned, by this time tomorrow, they will have pulled off one of the most brazen heists in military history. Meanwhile, more than 600 miles away at Ouadi Doum, French and American servicemen scramble to make last-minute preparations. The prize is a Soviet Mi-25 Hind D, the export version of the vaunted Mil Mi-24, which was so feared in Afghanistan, it was nicknamed the Devil's Chariot. The Soviet pilots referred to it simply as the Flying Tank. A colossal 18,000-pound beast, it's equal parts gunship and troop transport, and it's the Soviet Union's most advanced helicopter. Exceptionally fast, well-armed, and well-armored. The Americans don't have anything like it, and top military brass and the CIA have been dying to get their hands on one. Now, as the Chinooks touch down, the teams dismount and make contact with the advanced forces. At nearly 130 degrees in the shade, it's brutally hot, but with its rotor and stubby wings removed, the Hind is ready to make its unceremonious exit. Recon teams scouting the area have just radioed in an updated report. The Libyan forces are patrolling within a few miles of the airbase, and chances are they wouldn't take kindly to having their prized Russian wonder weapon snatched from right under their noses. Just months before, opting to destroy the Hind rather than letting it fall into enemy hands, General Gaddafi ordered his ragtag air force to destroy it and the other military equipment left behind by his retreating army after they'd been routed by the Chadian forces. But in another stroke of good luck for the Americans, the Libyan pilots must have had an off day because the enigmatic attack helicopter survived without a scratch. Designated Chalk 1 and Chalk 2, the first helicopter lands while the second hovers just above the Hind in preparation for loading. Too bulky to fit inside its cargo bay, the heavy and unwieldy Hind will have to be slung underneath the MH-47, a precarious operation, even under optimum conditions. Factor in desert winds, overly taxed engines, and the potential for enemy fire, and things could go wrong in a heartbeat. Nearly 8,000 horsepower surges through the driveshaft to the twin rotors, and after a brief shudder, the stalwart Chinook lifts the Soviet hardware into the sky. Nearby, finished loading miscellaneous equipment and the remaining troops, Chalk 2 also ascends and the pair begins the long, slow trek back to N'Djamena airfield and the waiting C-5s, while the Libyans within a stone's throw of the colossal caper remain totally clueless. Once at a French Foreign Legion airfield, it's meant to be relatively smooth sailing. That is until just an hour from the safety of N'Djamena, they run into an imposing sandstorm, blocking their path at 3,000 feet. In seconds, visibility plummets to almost zero, and buffeted by turbulence and tethered to the cumbersome and clandestine cargo, swinging like a giant pendulum beneath them, the pilots reduce speed to less than 50 miles an hour, and fly within sight of one another to avoid a collision. With the sandstorm still raging around them, they miraculously land with their priceless payload intact. But it's another 30 minutes until the storm abates, and the ground crews are able to load the Soviet warbird into the C-5 that'll haul it back to the States, where it'll undergo exhaustive testing and analysis. In less than 70 hours starting from Fort Campbell in Kentucky, the team flew halfway around the world, stole a prized piece of military hardware, and returned safely, without firing a shot or losing a single serviceman. A tactical coup that's still celebrated as one of the most daring raids of all time. Though, ironically, just a few years later with the fall of the Soviet Union, Hinds of various models became available in relatively large numbers, in many cases for just pennies on the dollar. It's November the 30th, 1951. In the skies over the Korean peninsula, a formation of 9 Chinese Tupolev Tu bombers rumbles through the clouds, moving towards their target on the island of Cho-Do.
Around them are 16 Lavochkin 11 fighter escorts, keeping them safe through hostile skies. They're cruising along when suddenly a burst of bullets falls from the heavens and tears through one of the bombers. Before the Chinese can even react, the attacker cuts through the formation from above. He's followed by 7 more enemies which pounce on the Chinese aviators. Tracers fill the once calm sky as the Chinese Lavochkin 11s and the American F-86 Sabres clash in a chaotic dogfight. The Sabres quickly find themselves unable to focus on the bombers as they fend off multiple enemy fighters simultaneously. But then a Tupolev 2 explodes in midair, torn to shreds from below without any warning. The same Sabre from the start cuts through the middle of the bombers, fearlessly charging through heavy fire with total disregard for his own life. The mysterious aviator comes right back for another run and fires a single short burst. It strikes dead on target and another bomber bursts into flames. This pilot is squadron leader and World War II ace, Major George Andrew Davis. The tide turns against the Lavochkin 11s. Their pilots are unable to make up for their shortcomings. The Chinese squadron is fighting for their lives when a group of MiG-15s arrives to the rescue. The MiGs pounce upon the unsuspecting Americans, their leader easily getting on the 6 o'clock of the Sabre of First Lieutenant Raymond Barton. The MiG fires multiple times, striking the American fighter on the wings and cockpit, but failing to take him down. Barton performs evasive maneuvers as he requests aid on the radio. The MiG's 23 and 37mm shells are zipping past his canopy.
Charlie, on my tail! Charlie, I'm stuck, need help! Copy that.
Davis heeds the call. He dives into action and quickly sees the dogfight, but can't differentiate between the two jets. Their profile is just too similar at this distance. Davis orders Barton to maneuver left and right on his mark. He observes carefully and identifies the plane not following his instructions and pounces. He sweeps down from above and unleashes his 6 50 caliber machine guns upon the enemy jet. The barrage strikes square on the enemy's cockpit, taking him out instantly and saving Barton's life. At the end of the day, the squadron suffered no losses and was credited with 8 victories. Davis claimed 3 of them, bringing his tally to 5 and making him the first ever American to become an ace in 2 wars. But back at base, Davis is far from the daring and wild killer he is in the air. In fact, he's the complete opposite. He's quiet and reserved, never drinks, smokes, never brags about his accomplishments and skills, despite being a serious candidate for the best pilot of his age. This juxtaposition on top of being a World War II ace made him a legend amongst the force. His experience earned him command of the 334th Fighter Squadron of the 4th Fighter Wing. He excelled at the post, leading by example and demanding strict discipline amongst his men. Under his leadership, the squadron became one of the best battling for the Korean skies. Davis grew to be so valuable that he became irreplaceable. It was protocol for aces to be recalled back to the US for their safety, and so they could teach their skills to the next generation of pilots. But Davis is so instrumental in his role that the Air Force can't find anyone to take his place, and so he remains fighting in Korea and seeing more action than ever. Just half a month after becoming an ace, he becomes a double ace, claiming his 10th victory on December the 13th. But that was all to change on February the 10th, 1952. Davis is flying in formation with 3 fellows from his squadron. They're providing cover for a group of F-84 Thunderjets across the infamous MiG Alley, where MiG patrols are so common and numerous that Sabres rarely venture into it with formations smaller than 12.
This is Red 1, breaking the flights. White circle.
Davis is feeling confident and had dispersed his 16-man squadron into 4-man flights to cover a wider area for the bombers following behind. But just as they approach MiG Alley, disaster strikes in Davis's flight. One of his men, codenamed Red 3, reports an oxygen failure and must return to base. They are arranged in pairs of leaders and wingmen, which means that if Red 3 retreats, Red 4 must too follow. But they don't have an option, and the pair turn back to base, and the 4-man flight is reduced in half just as they take the highway to the danger zone over the Yalu River. Charging into MiG Alley with nothing but your wingman for immediate assistance would take the breath away for any other pilot. But Davis isn't any pilot and continues with his characteristic fearlessness. His wingman, First Lieutenant Littlefield, is keenly aware of the danger they're putting themselves in, but trusts his squadron leader's judgment and bravely follows without question or hesitation. It doesn't take them long before they spot a 5 MiG squadron to the north, and then 10 more northwest shortly after. Davis evaluates the contacts and realizes the 10 MiGs are headed straight towards the incoming Thunderjets. They push the throttle to full, and the pair races to intercept. They approach unseen from above, and Davis pounces upon the enemy without hesitation, Littlefield in tow. The MiGs spot them at the last moment and scatter for their lives, but one of them has a split-second hesitation and pays the price. Davis lights him up with his trademark accuracy, striking the enemy and turning it into a flying fireball. Davis pulls out of his dive and instantly lands his crosshairs onto a second target. He pulls the trigger, and it too falls under the Saber's deadly volley. Davis then immediately sets off after a third. It's a daring move. He's lost speed, and maneuvering for another kill will only keep him slow and vulnerable. But he's so close, and is confident these Chinese won't be good enough to take advantage of it. He keeps up the chase, maneuvering sharply left and right, getting closer to a straight shot, but also he's bleeding away more and more speed. Unknown by Davis, another MiG unit is patrolling the region far above, and among its ranks is Chinese ace Zhang Jihui. They spot the 2 MiGs going down in flames below them and swiftly dive into battle, Zhang leading the charge. They accelerate towards a swarm of battling planes and tracers, the chaos making it difficult to pick out friend from foe. But in between it all, he spots a single, slow, flying jet, sporting the unmistakable yellow stripes of a Saber. Davis is still focused on the MiG ahead when a shell strikes him from above. Littlefield is battling hard against the swarm of MiGs when he sees his leader out of control and engulfed in smoke. Enemies descend on the wounded machine, and Littlefield rushes to cover him. He desperately fights MiGs off Davis's tail, and he follows him all the way down to the ground. But no parachute ever opens, and the Saber crashes into the earth. Lieutenant Littlefield cannot believe his eyes, but before he can dwell on the events, a shell fires past his canopy. The swarm of MiGs is now on his tail. Littlefield slams to full throttle and escapes the scene, dodging shots all over. He dashes left and right, desperately maneuvering for his life, but he can't shake them. There are just too many. In a last-ditch attempt, he sends his Saber straight into the clouds and turns sharply inside them, finally managing to throw off his pursuers. But then the adrenaline wears off and reality of what has transpired sets in. He takes his radio and reports the unthinkable.
Base. This is Red 2. Red 1 is down.
Davis's actions successfully dispersed the interceptors, and the bombers were able to execute their mission unopposed. But at what cost? His loss was greatly felt across the Air Force and stateside. By the end of the war, he was still ranked the 4th deadliest pilot of the conflict at 14 victories, only surpassed after his death. With his World War II service, he raked up a total of 21 confirmed victories throughout his life. George Andrew Davis would be posthumously promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, as well as awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor and a Purple Heart for his valiant actions on that fateful day, added to the already extensive list of medals he had earned in his life. They would be received by his wife and 3 children at a ceremony in Reese Air Force Base. Thanks for staying with us until the end. Let us know in the comments that you did.